Hi, welcome to What the Bleep Does This Mean? My name is Bill McCamley, and on this podcast, we try to make some sense out of fairly complicated public policy stuff that will affect you. And today, we're going to be talking about the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So on Friday, we got some pretty bad news. It turns out the US economy hasn't created a lot of new jobs in the past 3 months, and unemployment is starting to rise. In fact, the economic situation hasn't been this bad since the first month of COVID back in 2020. After we got the news, President Donald Trump fired the lady who was in charge of giving us this information. And this sort of thing is really, really dangerous. And I'd like to take a few minutes of your time to explain why. So, every first Friday of the month, a government agency called the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out a report showing stuff like how many jobs have been created, how many people are on unemployment, and what kind of wages people make. The report is officially called the Employment Situation Summary, but everyone pretty much just refers to it as the jobs report. How do I know this stuff? I used to be the secretary of the New Mexico Workforce Solutions Department, which is the state's version of the Department of Labor. And through this job, I was in charge of New Mexico's state version of the BLS, which here is called the Economic Research and Analysis Bureau. And because of that experience, I can tell you this. The people that work for these departments are total nerds. And I mean that in the highest possible manner. They are educated, neutral data folks who treat their jobs as scientists. They're generally not politicians. The lady that ran our version of the BLS was there under a Republican governor before I got in, stayed after 2018, and a Democrat got elected and appointed me. And I can tell you, she did the exact same job, the same way for my Republican predecessor as she did for me. The woman who Trump fired, her name is Erica McCanterfer, and she had 20 years of experience in the department. She actually worked there under Trump the first time after getting a PhD in economics from Virginia Tech. So, a really smart cookie. These are professional economists who use a system of phone calls, emails, home visits, and even sometimes regular letters to form a survey where they talk to workers and employers to get this information. And they don't just do the monthly jobs report. They're in charge of getting a ton of information on things like who's working minimum wage jobs, who's getting the highest salaries, how many people are getting hurt at which jobs, and a really important one for today's situation, the Consumer Price Index. The CPI measures inflation, or in regular words, how much more are you paying for shit? And we all know that over the past few years, people paying more for rent, cars, eggs, and childcare hurts. It's mentioned in poll after poll as one of the most important things folks care about right now, and is one of the major reasons Trump won last year. So it's really, really, really important that we have this information and that it is honestly straight up. Because with it, people in charge can figure out how to fix problems. And I'll give you a couple examples. First, inflation and interest rates. So we all know that prices have been rising like crazy since COVID. One of the tools the US government has to fight this is to keep interest rates higher. Remember, interest rates are the cost anyone has for borrowing money. If you put money in the bank, they're borrowing money from you. So if you have a savings account, they're going to give you interest so they can then loan it out to other people. And if you need to go to the bank and get a loan for a car or a house or whatever, you're borrowing money from them. They're going to charge you an interest rate, which you then pay off every month, which is the cost of borrowing that money. The higher that rate is, the less likely it is you're going to borrow money to buy that car or house because it's more expensive. And while that really sucks if you want to buy the car or house because it costs more, it keeps the amount of money in our overall system down. The result, people buy less stuff, and that lowers the pressure on businesses to raise their costs. It's why the Federal Reserve, the people in charge of setting interest rates, have kept these rates pretty high over the past few years. Without the higher rates, more people get more money, which goes into the system, which raises prices, creating all sorts of problems. And I'll actually go into some bad examples of that later. Another reason that we need this data to be straight up, in my old gig running the state employment office, getting good data on whether more or less people were losing jobs was huge. If we were going into a recession, it meant we had to hire more people at our department to man the phones because we knew a lot more people were going to go on unemployment and needed to get help. And for all the people out there saying, well, you can just do this by AI or computers or whatever, let me tell you something I learned firsthand hard during COVID. People just want to fucking talk to someone when they're having trouble. So you got to have someone on the phone that knows what they're doing. Additionally, this gives people in positions like the one I used to have and those in schools and other training programs information they need on job training. We all know, for instance, that we need more carpenters, welders, and plumbers right now because of this data, of these reports. So schools can really focus their training and apprenticeships on these areas. And looking into the future, this data will also let us know which jobs are going away because of AI. So the focus can be more on the jobs that AI and robots can't do, leading to people to get better jobs. For all of these reasons and more, we need that accurate data. If we can't trust it, we can't use the tools we have to fix things. And if we can't do that, life gets worse. Trump firing Dr. McIntyre because the job numbers sucked is super scary. When asked why he fired her, his answer was that she was politically motivated and called her, again, a PhD in economics with 2 decades of experience, incompetent. But he didn't offer any evidence or, a real reason other than he was a 2-year-old throwing a hissy fit. And while, yes, she was nominated to the post by Joe Biden, she was confirmed by the Senate in 2024 by a vote of 86 to 8. A couple of Republican senators you may have heard of voted for her. J.D. Vance, who's now Trump's vice president, and Marco Rubio, Trump's Secretary of State. So what happens if you fire expert economists and replace them with cronies who will only say what makes the leader happy, even if it means they have to lie about what's going on? Well, recent history gives us a couple of examples. In the African country of Zimbabwe for 30 years, they had this president who was really a dictator. His name was Robert Mugabe, and he won many of his elections by shooting the opposition and rigging votes. He didn't leave office until his own party ousted him in a coup in 2017. One of the reasons? In the middle of the 2000s, Zimbabwe experienced what is called hyperinflation, which means you know how bad we've had it under COVID? It was way worse there. It started because, among other things, the government wanted to spend a bunch of money on their military to be involved in a conflict in their neighboring country of Congo. So they just started printing more money. But if you just start printing more money and there isn't an increase in the amount of stuff you can buy, it just means a regular buyer has to take more money with them to go shopping. In Zimbabwe, this spiraled out of control and it got really stupid. It got to the point where you could have a 100 trillion Zimbabwe dollar banknotes, trillion with a T, and you couldn't buy a ride on a bus. Mugabe actually stopped reporting data in 2008 because it made him look so incompetent. Because of all this, banks collapsed. No one wanted to make anything, so manufacturing stopped. A bunch of people moved out of the country, and a ton of people starved. It got so bad, they actually stopped using their own money and adopted the US dollar because we're so safe. You know what could have stopped some of this? If they had a system in place run by neutral experts who took real, honest information coming in and used well understood tools to keep things going. But no one wanted to piss off the dictator who, shoots people he doesn't like. A more recent example is Turkey. They have another president, this guy Tayyip Erdogan, who is turning more into a dictator every year. He's been Turkey's leader since 2003. He actually changed the country's government in 2017 to weaken the nation's legislature and give himself, as president, more power. His term has been described as big man rule, where he's cracked down on things like free speech and acceptance of a diverse population to keep power. In 2017, inflation started happening, and their central bank wanted to raise interest rates to help keep it from spiraling out of control, like we just talked about. In May of that year, Erdogan announced that he didn't like that because it looked bad, so he would be taking more direct control of the economy. He actually lowered interest rates because it sounded good, and that was exactly the opposite thing that international economists said he should do. Apparently, he thought he knew better than the people who spent their lives studying this stuff. And the results went about as well as you think. The economy collapsed. People stopped buying stuff. Banks had to take over the largest phone provider in the country because they couldn't pay off their debts. Electric prices rose 57%, and 20%, 27% of youth ended up unemployed. All of this led to a ton of people killing themselves. A guy actually committed suicide by setting himself on fire in front of his city hall because he couldn't get a job and pay off these debts. Things then got a little bit better, but in 2021, Erdogan fired three of his central bank directors, appointing a couple dudes who didn't really know what the fuck they were doing. He didn't give a reason, but it was reported that the economists that he fired didn't agree with a recent interest rate cut. Well, official numbers showed that inflation went up to 72% in 2022 and remained above 50% per year in 2023 and last year. Basically, the currency, in Turkey it's called the lira, became almost worthless. And it's actually worse than this. The Turkish government has been accused of data manipulation, which in regular words means they're straight up lying. The real inflation rate was estimated not to be 72% in 2022, but actually closer to 160%. More bad shit happened. Food prices doubled. The cost of transportation rose over 160%. Just last year, the cost to buy a house, go to school, or travel in Turkey were astronomical. And while it looks like things are getting better this year, the only reason for that is Erdogan finally agreed to put people in charge who know what the fuck they're doing and were willing to keep interest rates high to get control of the economy. Examples don't end there. In Greece's financial crisis of 2010, the guy they brought in to be honest about the economy and actually got them an international bailout to help with their debts did a good job, but he is still under investigation by the political party that got them into this mess because he actually told the truth. In 2007, Argentina, the government fired or prosecuted economists who told the truth, even though it contradicted the ruling party's story to the public that the economy was fine. They eventually did what Mugabe did in Zimbabwe and stopped publishing data because, well, things weren't fine. The government couldn't pay its debt. This led to several violent protests, and they actually had five presidents come and go in the span of weeks after their economy collapsed. This guy Mao in China was known to purge economists who knew what they were doing in his Great Leap Forward policy of the late 1950s. This led to one of the biggest famines in the history of the world. 30 million people starved to death. And the late Soviet Union was known for punishing economists for data the party didn't like. The result was that things got really bad, and eventually the whole country fell apart. The lesson here is simple. We in the US have an economy that in many ways is the envy of the world for its stability and resilience. One of the big reasons is a system where one dude just doesn't do whatever the fuck he wants to look good. We've had really smart people produced real, honest information that lets other really smart, hardworking people sometimes do hard things to keep things rolling. If we get away from that, and Trump seems to be going down that road with this firing and threatening to fire the guy who runs the Fed, which is in charge of US interest rates, other nations show us that really bad things can happen. So as you go to vote in Congress next year and for president in 2028, make sure you ask good questions like, are you going to fire smart nerds who care about this country, even if they tell a truth you may not like? If the answer is yes, you may want to consider voting in another direction. Thanks for listening to this. As always, really, really appreciate any comments, questions, or feedback you have. You can do that on the social media platforms this is on, or you can email whatthebleep@gmail.com. That's whatthebleep@gmail.com. Thanks everybody for watching this, and keep y'all's heads up out there.